What's up, everyone, and welcome into DodgerHeads, presented by DodgerBlue.com. My name is Jeff Spiegel, and I'm your host today. And we are joined by Daniel Starkand, one of our great writers over at Dodger Blue. And Daniel, it's good to have you back on here. And we'll get to baseball here in just a moment, but it's kind of impossible to ignore what's going on in our country right now. And honestly, we shouldn't ignore it because I think it's something that has been ignored for far too long. And, I'll just say right off the top, it's been good to see all of the players who have spoken out against what's going on, not against what's going on, but in support of what's going on, I should say. And I know you and I were talking off the air, and you mentioned what Mookie Betts said really resonated with you.
Yeah. A lot of the Dodgers players put out good statements, but I'd say Mookie's resonated the best with me. So I'm just going to read it real quick. He posted this on Instagram yesterday. He said, "Over the last few days, I have sat in disbelief yet again how a black man could be killed because of the color of his skin. As I continue to process the recent events, I am reminded that our fight is not over. We must not get comfortable when the protesting is over, but remain dedicated to our mission, equality for all. I am more than an athlete. I am a black man, a father, a son, a brother, and a friend. Hashtag enough is enough. Hashtag God protect us. Hashtag please stop killing us." So yeah, I thought that was a really great statement. And I just want to add something real quick. Obviously, as a white guy, I don't really have to worry about the things that people of color have to worry about. I could leave my home safely and not have to worry about if I'm going to get killed by a cop or whatever the case may be. And I think it's pretty sad that we're in the year 2020 and people of color still have to worry about that every single day of their lives. I was watching the movie Straight Outta Compton the other day, and in that movie they highlight the Rodney King murder and the riots that happened after that, and that was in 1992. So we're almost 30 years later, and literally not a thing has changed. So yeah, I just think it's pretty shameful. And I think us as a society need to do better, and we need to work together to find a solution. I love what everyone's been doing, protesting, letting their voices be heard. I don't think people of color or people of different ethnicities or genders or sexual orientations, there's no reason to discriminate against people for any of those reasons. And I think it's sick that it's still happening. And yeah, I just love that everyone's getting out there and letting their voices be heard.
Yeah. And I mean, I think, what comes to mind for me is the easy way out, especially for, as you said, white men like you and I, the easy way out is to ignore. But I think what I've realized is the fact that I have the choice to ignore this and the choice to avoid this and the choice to be indifferent is actually a sign of the problem of the world that we live in.
Agreed.
Just the fact that I have that. And so, I believe we have to reject the temptation toward indifference. We have to seek justice shoulder to shoulder with the people who have no choice but to deal with this inconvenience. I think that's our duty. And, my day job is I'm actually a pastor. And so I believe in a God of justice and a God who stands alongside and advocates for the oppressed. But even just as a human being, to know that there are brothers and sisters of ours who live and grow up in fear is both disheartening and honestly, it's kind of offensive. And so I've just been grateful for the actions of people out there right now who are bringing this to light, who are making it impossible to ignore the racism and the oppression that is woven into the fabric. The George Floyd, the murder is just the tipping point. This is just a small part, unfortunately, in much a longer story. And so I'm grateful for the players, black and white, the organizations that have spoken out, who are lending their voice to this. So, of course, when it comes to rioting and looting, none of that stuff needs to be happening. But the need to protest injustice is built into our nation. And so my hope is that everything that is going on actually leads to something more than just incremental change. And that this is a moment that we look back on with reverence as one that really changed the world. So, again, our hearts, our thoughts, our prayers are with the people that are protesting, the people that are living this on a day-to-day basis. And so, again, we're rooting for you. We're rooting for change and just a world to be able to see that Black Lives Matter, just like equally, all lives matter, but specifically Black Lives Matter, because that's a group of people who feel that they live in a country that doesn't believe that. And unfortunately, I think they're right. So while there's no easy way to transition out of that and into something as seemingly meaningless as baseball, We're going to try to. And so here's the plan sort of for the rest of tonight. The plan is to talk through the latest news in the negotiations. There's a lot to get to on that front. We'll talk about where we are optimism-wise and, of course, what all that means for the Dodgers. Then we'll get to some breakout candidates. We'll talk some actual 2020 Dodger baseball, and Daniel and I will pick a few players that we think might exceed some expectations a little bit. And then at the end, I've got some rapid-fire questions that Daniel has no idea about. So let's dive right in to the headlines in baseball today, which is the owners and the players and where they are at in the negotiations, if we can even call them negotiations. Heading into the weekend, we knew the owners had proposed an outrageous financial structure that would have penalized the highest paid players that seemed clearly to be trying to start a war between minimum level players and luxury tax type guys. But no dice, the players didn't bite, and they basically said, we're not talking money with you. We already have an agreement from March 26th. We signed it. We get prorated salaries. Basically, we get an amount per game. So however many games we play, we get paid that much per game. So the players officially countered with their first proposal on Sunday, and here were the highlights. They proposed a 114-game season, which was a 32-game increase of what the owners had suggested. They offered deferred salaries if the postseason is canceled. They created a provision where players can opt out of playing in 2020 amidst virus concerns. Now, Jeff Passan noted, quote, although the players expect the league to reject it, they hope this will serve as a bridge to a potential deal this week, which it's beautiful when you propose something that you just understand and expect to be rejected, but I guess that's how this works. MLB, of course, had proposed an 82-game season, so the 114 games was believed to be the sticking point because the owners have basically said every game we play, we lose money. So the more games we play, the more money we lose. The players disagree with that. So as far as the opting out, I'll just add a couple details here. They basically said if you are considered high risk, you could opt out of playing baseball and still get paid. If you are not high risk, you could opt out, but you would not get paid. You would still accrue service time. Some other notes, they proposed expanding the playoffs not only for this year, but also next year, which would add some money for the owners. They asked for a salary advance of $100 million to be split amongst players during the second version of spring training coming up. They said players, these were some interesting notes, players would be willing to wear microphones on the field if that was sort of an added value to the league as far as TV deals go, as well as they offered to hold an all-star game or a home run derby, events like that if the league was interested. So that was the Players Association. So before we get to the news that came out on Monday about how the owners might react, Daniel, when you saw all this over the weekend, what were your initial reactions?
That it was a lot different from the owner's first proposal, and I had no clue how they're going to come to an agreement on this. Yeah, it's kind of sad that this is happening. Yeah. This is playing out the way it is. I feel like this is a huge opportunity for baseball to kind of take the stage as far as, sports go. We're gonna have the NBA returning, but that's not till the end of July or August. Then football's back in August, September. So the entire months of June and July, there's just nothing going on, and I think that's a huge opportunity for MLB to just own the stage and market their players and gain some fans in the process. Maybe they'll be losing money in the short term, but they'll make it back in the long term if you have all these thousands and millions of people that fall in love with baseball because there's nothing else to watch. So I think mostly the owners, but I'd say everyone's being a little bit selfish, mostly the owners. But I think if they're not able to come to an agreement, which I'd say I'm still pretty optimistic they will, then I think that's a huge missed opportunity for baseball as a whole.
Yeah, it does feel like we're getting pretty late into this process. I mean, today is June 1st, and we've still got so many items that are in these proposals that feel just like placeholders, basically. It's almost as if the owners are suggesting things just to get the players to bite, and the players say something like a 114-game season. The only realistic reason they would suggest that is because they want to try and force the owners and say, if you want to play, like if you're going to try and play 114 games, it's got to be now. And the players know that what the owners want most is the playoffs. And so they say, well, we'll just keep throwing out long season proposals at you unless you're going to take this seriously. And while the owners are saying, let's split people up. And so it's kind of a mess. And so on Monday, we got word of the league's response, not officially, but this was sort of some sources about discussions going on at the league level. And the most fascinating thing is something that you kind of alluded to. The players opted for an increase of 32 games over the initial 82 games proposal. Well, now the league has referenced possibly going down 32 games to a 50 game, which is basically, as far as I can tell, their version of, okay, if you want to be played on a per game basis, then instead of playing 82 games, we're only going to play 50 games. And Passan again notes that this isn't an officially proposed idea, but one that is sort of outlined as a last resort, almost like a threat of, okay, well, if you won't want to negotiate in good faith, then this is where we're going to end up. And the reason is because MLB is arguing that if you want to honor the March 26th, which say you get paid on a prorated basis, also included in that contract is some language that they believe gives the league the right to set the schedule for the upcoming season. So they say if you want to harp on the March 26th agreement, which gets you prorated salaries, well, then we get to set the schedule, and we're only going to set up for 50 games, which means you all get about 30% of the salary. So this is where we're at. And let me start with a question that you have already partly answered. But as you think about the Sunday proposal, as you think about the Monday source news that started to leak out, where are you at optimism-wise? If one is you're canceling your cable subscription because there's no baseball coming this year, and 10 is you're canceling weeknight plans in the month of July, where are you at on a scale of 1 to 10?
I'd say I'm still at like a 7 or 8 that there's going to be a season. I just think they have too much to lose just by canceling it altogether, and that's going to lead to more disagreements down the road. So it's not like they could just cancel this season, then everyone shows up for spring training in 2021 and everything's all good.
Yeah.
But I do think that they're going to be able to come to an agreement. But I will say MLB, the report that came out that you just talked about, it was kind of clever on MLB's part, or the owners, that they said, you guys want full prorated salaries, like, okay, we'll give it to you, but we're only going to play 50 games. So in the end, it's the same amount of money they would be making if pretty much the same from MLB's original proposal. It's just 30 games less. And I don't know if you want to get into the games aspect of it, but I think 50 games is not nearly enough to have a legitimate season.
Yeah.
I don't know if you probably agree on that.
Yeah, I mean, at least it helps that we're talking about an additional playoff team. So, I mean, that helps. But yeah, I'm with you. I mean, as a Dodger fan, we've said it over and over and over again. The more games, the better for the Dodgers, because it gives more margin for error and more time for the cream to sort of rise to the top. And so, I'm with you. 50 games is really worrisome to me. And I don't know. I mean, I was reading something today about one person who had kind of dealt with Rob Manfred in the past on behalf of the union. And they were kind of suggesting that Manfred, sometimes he likes to make the players beg for something that he wants to give them anyways. And so a lot of the players' side believe that the owners actually do want more games, that this idea of one side wants 50, the other wants 114 is not actually a real argument, that both sides would like to play as many games as possible. Now, the owners want to make sure they get the playoffs in. That's their major concern. So their issue with 114 games is the more games we play, the more risk we take on of a second wave of the coronavirus hitting and us having to cancel the playoffs, which is where we make our money. But do the owners really want to only play 80 games? Of course not. So I'll be really fascinated to see where that ends. You know, it's kind of like if you want to go to 114 plus 32, we'll go minus 32 so that we end up meeting back in the middle on the 82 that we talked about at the beginning. So the flip side, again, I shouldn't say the flip side, but the other piece to keep in mind is we're running out of time. So if you want to play 82 games, if you want to play more games, we're getting close. Like if teams are going to start reporting and you need 3 weeks for spring training and you want to start on July 4th, I mean, we're talking about this week, really. We've got to get an agreement done so that teams can get a couple weeks heads up so they can start spring training. So I'm with you. I'm still remain fairly optimistic. I think this week I was hoping for some more progress that we haven't quite seen. But I just still think there's too much on the table. I mean, you mentioned it. My understanding is the CBA is actually up after next season. So the scary part is if a season doesn't happen this year, I don't want to go doomsday, but I don't think it's crazy to imagine that there's not a 2021 season either because of all that looms. So there's a lot at stake, financially, interest-wise, et cetera. But I'm with you. I still remain optimistic, but the 50 games worries me a little bit.
Yeah, and I also think something that we need to realize is that these are billionaires negotiating with millionaires.
Yeah.
AKA they're all pretty smart people who have done okay for themselves. So they know how to negotiate. So neither side is going to put their best offer on the table from the beginning. They're going to put their worst offer, and then they'll counter with their worst offer, and eventually they'll get to the middle, hopefully at least.
Yeah.
So if the players want 114 games, the owners want 50. I don't see why they can't meet in the middle at 82, which is the original proposal. So I
Yeah.
guess we'll just have to wait and see.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, so often I hear people talk about sports as if it's this goodwill thing that's like a nonprofit that exists to make us happy. The reality is these are businesses, and
Yeah.
they don't, I mean, they care about you only so much as they care about the money that you can bring them, whether it's in TV viewership or whether it's in stadium and beer, $12 beers you're buying, So at the end of the day, these negotiations are not designed to make me and you happy. They're designed to make them as much money as possible. So hopefully that happens, only because them making money means us watching baseball. So hopefully that's what we get to. And with that in mind, let's move on to some actual baseball talk. We're talking about the Dodgers. You and I are both optimistic that the season does end up happening. And so we wanted to start looking ahead to that. And so I wanted to kind of highlight a few of what I'll call breakout players for 2020, candidates to be breakout players. And before we get too far, let me just define that term, because I know that's sort of a vague term. I'm basically asking you, Daniel, to give me some guys who you think will outperform expectations. So Cody Bellinger last year is a great example. Everyone expected him to be really, really good. I don't think anybody was expecting him to be the best player in baseball. So in our categories, we're talking about this. We could be talking about a guy going from good to great like Bellinger last year, or it could be a guy who's going from okay to good. Again, the key is just sort of outperforming expectations. So I asked you to pick a couple. I've got a couple. I'll let you start. So 2 to 3 guys you're thinking could take a jump this year or could exceed expectations.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll start off by saying that this was pretty challenging just because the Dodgers have so many great, high profile guys. Like, it's tough to pick who's going to exceed the already high expectations. But the first guy I'll start with is Corey Seager. Obviously, we know what he's capable of. We saw, his rookie season, unanimous rookie of the year, third in the MVP voting, another all-star season after that. Last year wasn't his best year, but it's easy for some people to forget that he was coming off 2 major surgeries, Tommy John and hip surgeries. So he got off to a bit of a slow start. And then after that, once May and June kind of rolled around, we kind of started seeing the old Corey Seager returning, and then he had the hamstring injury, but then he finished strong again. So I think now that he's had a full healthy offseason and even more time since everything's been shut down, I absolutely think that Corey Seager can get back to the all-star level, maybe even MVP candidate type level that we've seen from him. He's still only like 25 or 26 years old. Like,
yeah.
I still think his best days are ahead of him. So he was first on my list. Next on my list, I had Chris Taylor.
Well, let me chime in real quick, because I had Seager on my list as well. So I'm with you on everything you said. I was looking back and I forgot exactly how good he was. So, I mean, he put up 6.9 WAR in 2016 and 6 WAR in 2017. So just for context, I mean, both of those numbers would have been by far the second best player on the Dodgers last season. After those 2 seasons, he only plays 26 games in 2018. Rebounds a little bit last year, but, like you said, he led the league in doubles, 19 home runs in just 134 games. I thought the part that was most interesting to me is right before he got hurt in June, he was on a 9-game hitting streak, and over that 9 games, he was 17 for 37 with 7 doubles and a home run. So, I mean, he was tearing the cover off the ball, and then he goes down. So, right. I'm with you. I mean, this isn't a guy that we're talking about is going to be – he was really good. Like, he was a really good – one of the top 10 shortstops in baseball last year in what most people would consider a down year. We're talking about a guy that has MVP-level talent in him. And so I'm with you. He was a guy on my list as well. Who'd you have second?
Yeah, the next guy I had was Chris Taylor. I just feel like no one ever talks about Chris Taylor.
Yeah.
Like, he's just been pretty consistent. Like, obviously he had the breakout season in 2017 and he hasn't quite been able to match that the last 2 years, but he could play any position on the diamond. Yeah. As soon as there's an injury, he's ready to fill in. And I was looking at his numbers last year and he got off to a really bad start, but in 92 games from May 3rd on, he had an 871 OPS, which is like, that's pretty elite. And it just shows like he's arguably one of the most underrated players in baseball just because no one ever mentions his name.
Yeah. Yeah, that is an interesting one. He seems like one of those guys that you almost like with Seager, I'm always believing that the best is yet to come. Whereas with Taylor, it's almost like I feel like I've already seen the best. Like I feel like he can't possibly come to the levels that he's already been. But to your point, why not? Like it could be Justin Turner 2.0, where Turner was sort of lounged around in sort of relative obscurity for a couple of years, even on the Dodgers, before really breaking out and proving to people that it wasn't a fluke.
And I also think if there's like a universal DH, that adds another spot to the lineup. So that's more opportunities for him, probably playing the field. So like the stars on the team could get off their feet and DH for a game. So I think he'll get plenty of playing time. And I think we could see the 27 Chris Taylor that everyone fell in love with when he kind of came out of nowhere.
Yeah, it's a great one.
Should I just keep going?
Yeah, go for it.
Next, who do I have next? I don't know if people are going to like this, but next I had AJ Pollock.
Okay.
Just because
I had him on my list.
I feel like he gets a lot more hate than he should. Like, yeah, he had a horrible postseason. Like, I'm not trying to justify that. He was awful. Like, he couldn't even hit the ball. But at the end of the day, that was like, what, a long weekend? Like, he had a bad week.
Yeah.
Like, so he's still – the Dodgers might have overpaid for him a little bit, but he's still a premier type player, and especially in a shortened type season where you don't really have to worry about injuries as much. And with the Dodgers' depth and the DH, he could get off his feet. He won't be playing every day. He could be in a platoon where he absolutely rakes lefties. I think he's going to have a good bounce back season. And also with him, just another number I had, in 58 games to finish out the year last year, that was after he got back from the injury, right after the All-Star break. He had an 885 OPS, which that's also elite. So I think we'll see a good year out of AJ Pollock, hopefully he'll silence all of his critics.
Yeah, he was like I said, him and Seager were sort of at the top of my list on the position player side. And again, I mean, 2015 was a long time ago, but 2015, he played a full season, 6.8 WAR. So, I mean, again, that basically a season that was on par with Corey Seager's rookie year, if you remember that one, which put him in sort of in the fringes of the MVP conversation. I mean, his like all of his numbers that year were crazy. I mean, even last year, he played 86 games for the Dodgers. He had 15 home runs. So his career high was 21 home runs. If you get this guy in a situation where, like you said, the DH is going to be his friend because it's a lot harder to get hurt if all you're doing is hitting. Now, he's supposed to be a good defender, but they've also got Bellinger in center field, so they don't need him as much out there. So I think he and Seager are both guys that benefit from that especially.
Yeah, and I think the numbers I just point out, the last 58 games, I'm pretty sure that's when he moved over from center to left as well. So maybe playing in left and not having to deal with the duties of being a center fielder, that could help him as well.
Yeah.
As far as focusing at the plate and, staying off the injured list.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, the last three guys I've got on my list are pitchers. Who's your last one?
My last one is a pitcher as well, and I had Tony Gonsolin.
Oh, okay.
Kind of similar to Taylor, I feel like he doesn't get talked about when it comes to like the Dodgers' young pitchers. Everyone brings up Dustin May, Julio Urias, Brusdar Graterol, who they just got, Josiah Gray's on the way. No one really talks about Gonsolin too much, but he was actually really good last year, and he's been good in the minor leagues every year. He could start, he could relieve, which will be, huge for the Dodgers, who in this shortened season with potential for double headers, you're going to need a lot of pitching depth, and you're going to need guys that can maybe make a spot start or long relief if a guy gets shelled.
Yeah.
So I think with no minor leagues, we're going to see a lot of Tony Gonsolin in 2020, and I think he's going to make the most of that opportunity.
Love it. Yeah, no, I'm with you. I mean, Gonsolin was really good last year, and on any other team in the league, we'd be talking about a guy who's a lock for a top 5 rotation spot. But no, I like that one. All right, well, let me give you the 3 guys that I got on my list that you didn't mention. 2 of them I think will be pretty expected. The third one might ruffle some feathers. So the first is a guy you mentioned, which is Julio Urias. It is insane to me how overlooked this guy is. I think mostly probably at a major league level, maybe not at a Dodgers level, but here's a guy who's 23 years old, who was once among one of the top prospects in baseball. He made his debut as a 19-year-old. Now, the year that he debuted, 15 starts, 3 relief appearances, a 3.17 FIP, a 3.39 ERA, striking out more than a batter an inning. Now, this was a 19/20-year-old, okay? So the next 2 years, he only gets 5 starts, 3 relief appearances. There were injuries. It was a mess. Obviously, he has some domestic assault stuff that came later on. It's just sort of a rough time for him, and we're not excusing any of that, of course. 2019, he comes back. He makes 8 starts. Now, a lot of those were with the opener, short ones. 29 relief appearances, 2.49 ERA with more than a strikeout an inning. So this is a guy as a 23-year-old that Andrew Friedman has said he's one of our 5 starters. The guy has never been bad, essentially. He's never been bad. He was average, I guess, in those short years with limited stuff. He was really good in the 2018 postseason. But again, I think another guy that benefits from a shortened season, a guy that has all the stuff that would be probably matching up with a lot of number 4 or 5 starters for other teams, which will probably help his stats a little bit. I just think that's a guy that people are overlooking that I genuinely think is a all-star level player this year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I agree. And I think Urias's biggest issue is that he came up at 19 years old with such high expectations.
Yeah.
And he wasn't able to live up to them, but like what 19-year-old is able to.
Yeah.
And then he had the injuries. So he's still just 23, which is the age like that most pitchers are coming up for the first time.
Totally.
I think Walker Buehler was 24 when he made his MLB debut, or 23. So yeah, I agree. I think Urias is going to have a big year. I have him in our fantasy league. I think you actually might have traded him.
I did. I hate that I traded him.
Yeah. So I will be keeping him this year. So
he's terrible. You should probably cut him. He's going to be terrible this year. Okay, next on my list, a guy with a big name, but a guy that I don't think people are expecting a whole lot of, which is David Price. So for many guys, I think Dodger fans live in one of 2 worlds. Either you're a diehard baseball fan that looks at David Price and says, this guy's washed, or you're a very casual baseball fan that hears David Price's name and thinks, oh, sweet, that guy's like a Cy Young winner, and he's like one of the best pitchers in the game, right? Well, last year, he threw 107 innings with a 4.28 ERA. Now, you read that, and it's like, that's pretty average, pretty disappointing, especially if you're the Dodgers who have 8 starters. But let me point out some numbers that kind of lie beneath the surface for David Price last year. He had the worst batted ball luck of his career. So on balls put into play, hitters were hitting 336, which is fairly high. That was 62 points higher than they hit against him the previous year. FIP, which kind of projects what your ERA should be if you account for luck, tabbed him as one of the worst underperformers last year. He had a 3.62 FIP, a 3.73 xFIP, which were basically, his FIP was the 26th best mark in all of baseball last season with pitchers over 100 innings. So he was ahead of Luis Castillo, Jose Quintana. He was actually ahead of Kershaw. He was ahead of Maeda. And not to mention, his strikeouts per 9 was actually up significantly. He had a career high of 10.73 strikeouts per 9 innings, which is almost a strikeout higher than his previous best in 2014. So I think if you add all that in, add it into a situation that I think he'll be more comfortable in. He didn't like the media in Boston. He didn't like all that. It's a lot more laid back. I think he won't feel the pressure of being an elite starter because he'll probably be the Dodgers' 3rd starter at best. All that tells me I think this is a guy that could be really good. Shortened season, veteran guy who knows what to do with his body, has to maximize things. I like David Price as another guy that could exceed some people's expectations, depending on if you're thinking he's a Cy Young Award winner. But if you're looking and saying, pencil in for a 4.3 ERA, I'd say I'd bet some good money on the under there.
Yeah. David Price is another guy I considered as well. I think what you alluded to about the pressure aspect, I think that'll be huge for him. When he's the 1 or 2 in Boston with him and Sale and they're trying to fight for a playoff spot, there's a lot more pressure on him than when he's the number 3 in LA behind Clayton Kershaw and Walker Buehler. And then also as far as injuries go, he struggled with his wrist last year. He had a cyst in his wrist, and I had him on my fantasy team as well. So I was watching all his starts, and there's about a 4 or 5 start stretch where you could tell the wrist was giving him issues, and I think that skewed his numbers a little bit. He had at the beginning of the season, he had a lot of really good starts where it's like, all right, this is still David Price. We saw him in the World Series the year before that. He pretty much dominated the Dodgers on the biggest stage there is.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think now that he's healthy and in a more laid back environment, I think we're going to see a good year from Price as well.
Okay, speaking of guys who dominated the Dodgers on a big stage, my last selection for this list is probably everybody's least favorite Dodger, none other than Joe Kelly. Now, this
Okay.
falls under the okay to good category, all right? I'm not advocating for Joe Kelly becoming an elite setup man. But here's what I see. In the first half last year, he had a 5.28 ERA. The second half was a 3.48. So he improved. Again, he's a guy like Price. Say the stats said he's probably got a little unlucky. On the season, he had a 3.78 FIP. His ERA was almost a full run higher than that. Batting average on balls in play was incredibly high. He had 25% of the fly balls hit against Joe Kelly last year went out of the yard. That number is freaking insane. 25%. Now, that might seem like, well, the guy throws 100, so what do you expect? Well, the 2 years prior, which maybe he got lucky, were 7% and 8%. So hovered around the low teens, 12, 13, 14 before that. So at the end of spring, he was looking good. His fastball was at 99. He was throwing a 90-mile-an-hour curve, which sounds insane to me. This is what he said. He said, I don't remember at the end of any spring training being able to throw that kind of velocity. My body feels healthy. That's my biggest takeaway. Roberts added that Kelly had some bad luck last year. He was battling some health things, Roberts indicated. So it's another guy. He came in with high expectations. He was absolutely brutal. In a lot of ways, it can only get better. Now, if you saw the video of him throwing a changeup through a window, you might be a little concerned. That was a pretty big target he missed. But hopefully Joe Kelly gets back. But that's the last guy that I've got in my okay to good list breakout candidates.
Yeah, I think with Joe Kelly, anyone who's watched him pitch knows that his stuff is as impressive as it gets with the triple-digit fastball, the wipeout breaking ball at 90 miles an hour. So if he could just figure out where those pitches are going, then I think he could be pretty deadly. And also, I don't think there will be as much pressure on him this year. Last year was kind of just Kenley, him, and Pedro Baez. This year they added Blake Trinan and Gratterall and who knows, maybe Dustin May and Gonsolin are in the bullpen. So I think there will be less pressure on him this year now that he's had a full year to settle in with the Dodgers. So it definitely wouldn't surprise me as well if Joe Kelly has a bounce back year.
Well, there you go. There's about 7 guys that we think you should look out for having some above average years. We agreed on Seager and Pollock. We got a bunch of other guys to look for too. So hopefully we've got a baseball season and we can see those things play out. So let me end with this. I want to ask you 3 questions. I don't know, have you gotten to check out any of the podcasts that Joe Davis and Oral Hershiser have been doing?
I've listened to a couple of them.
Okay. Okay. Well, I'm going to steal a couple questions for them because I found them to be pretty fascinating. I was listening to them today, and they do a great job. If you haven't checked out their podcast, I think it's just called Joe and Oral or something like that. So look it up. But here's 3 questions. The first one you might already know the answer to, but there's a player on the roster currently that Dave Roberts has said he wants to take over managing the Dodgers when he retires. Do you know who this player is?
I think is it Justin Turner?
It's Justin Turner. So he has said that he told Justin Turner actually told the story, Roberts confirmed it, but basically said, you're the guy I want to take over when I leave. So it made me thinking, are there any other players that you can think of? Again, you've gotten no preparation on any of these questions, but are there any other players, past or present, that you could see one day managing this roster? Of course, Dave Roberts was a Dodger who came back to manage them, but are there any other guys, past or present, that jump off the page to you?
Yeah. The name that immediately comes to mind is Chase Utley.
Yeah.
We know how close he is with all those guys. We know how high his baseball IQ is. He said when he retired that he wants to spend more time with his family, so I'm not surprised he didn't immediately jump into a full-time managing job. But I think when a few years go by, I think he'll get the itch to get back in the game, and I think he'd be perfect for a manager-type role.
Yeah, and I think he might even have some sort of role with the Dodgers, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, he has like a special advisor front office role. Who knows if that even means anything, but he's at the stadium every once in a while in uniform hanging out with the guys, so it's cool to see because he's just such a great guy.
Yeah, the other guy that came to mind was maybe someone like Russell Martin. You see catchers are the guys that often make the transition. So I could see Martin. You got a couple, Ross Stripling seems like a really smart guy. That'd be a sleeper one. David Price is a Vanderbilt guy who's been under some amazing managers himself. So I don't know if any of these guys would want to. David Freese, another one of these veterans. Martin and Freese are both guys that when I listen to the podcast, those are some widely respected guys. And of course, Turner probably makes the most sense of the whole bunch. Just an LA kid who loves the Dodgers, loves baseball. You listen to the interview, which was really good, and it was kind of like, this guy eats, sleeps, breathes baseball. Like, he's not, what comes after baseball for him is hopefully more baseball. So that was one of the questions.
And just to add to that real quick, I've had the privilege covering games at the stadium, so I've been in the clubhouse a bunch of times, and when you're in there, there's really no question of like who the leader is. Like, it's obviously they have a lot of veteran guys, Clayton Kershaw, Kenley Jansen, but I think Justin Turner is like the unquestioned leader in that locker room.
Interesting. There you go. Okay, the second question they've been asking each of these guys. Well, they've been asking a lot. So here's another question. If you could hang out with any Dodger for one day, only current 40-man roster, any Dodger for one day, who are you picking?
That's tough. There's a lot of characters. Kike would be a good one. That would be the most fun and entertaining. I feel like I'd have a lot in common with like Jock Peterson. He loves sports and stuff like that, so we could talk about a lot of cool things. I don't know.
Yeah,
I'll probably go Kike just because of how entertaining it would be. Nonstop laughs.
Yeah, both those guys are on my list. Jock seems like the dude I could probably he just seems like a dude. And Kike obviously seems like a character. The third one I put on for a couple of reasons was actually Mookie. In part because I know the least about him, in part because he's obviously a superstar that's headed for the Hall of Fame, which doesn't hurt in this category. But also just, I mean, again, even in the interview, he just seems like a normal dude. Like he doesn't fit the bill of superstar that you necessarily expect. He just seems like a normal guy, down to earth. And so he seems like a good guy that to hang out with for a day.
Yeah. And also, I'm going to change it up a little bit, but if it's on the day that Clayton Kershaw is starting, I would love to just not even say a word to him, just tail him for the whole day. Just see what he eats for breakfast, what he does in the morning, his routine at the stadium. I think that would be really cool to see for a day.
Yeah. Okay, the last question I'm going to steal for their podcast, which is, if there was a WrestleMania cage match amongst all of the Dodgers, who would be the last man standing? This is a question they've asked all the guys that have been on. So of the 40-man roster, if there was a cage match, who do you have as the last man standing?
I can't go Puig, right?
No, gosh, no.
Maybe Max Muncy. I feel like he's kind of got some underrated strength. He's a pretty bulky guy. Kenley, I think, is just the flat-out biggest guy on the team.
Yeah.
Edwin Rios is another guy.
Big guy. I did a lot of research today. I want you to know on sizes of Dodger players, and I'll say Muncy is listed at like 6'1", 215, which I don't believe for a second.
Yeah, he's at least 225.
So you're right. Jansen is the biggest. He's 6'5", 265, which I'm beginning to think that 265 is the biggest number the Dodgers want to put. Gratterall is listed at 6'1", 265. So if you want to go size-wise, Jansen, that'd probably be my choice. Now, here's a fun fact trivia question. Do you know who the lightest player on the Dodgers 40-man roster is?
Is he a position player?
Nope.
A pitcher?
Pitcher. 174 pounds.
Walker Buehler?
Joe Kelly, 6'1", 174, and the guy throws 100 miles an hour.
Yeah. Well, and I bet Walker Buehler's right around that same size. I don't know what he's listed at, and he also throws 100 miles an hour. It's nuts.
Yeah, it's funny, that question. Austin Barnes got a couple votes. They say just pound for pound, that guy's scrappy, and he kind of flips a switch. I think it was, who was it? I think it was Bellinger. Somebody said Pedro Baez. They basically said, like, he's the most even-keeled dude, but if he were to flip a switch, he would be a handful to deal with. So those were a couple of the names that got thrown around, but Barnes and Baez. So there you go. I
might have thrown Rich Hill's name in the mix if he was still here, just because of how crazy.
Yeah. There's a little that's what I think. I think that's why people like Barnes. Even watching some of those Dodgers Zoom calls, it feels like he's got a little bit of crazy in him. Yeah. So, but he's small. I mean, he's like 5'10". So I don't know. I mean, 6'5", 265 Jansen. That's a lot to deal with.
That's tough.
And again, I think 265 is light. I think we're probably 280, maybe more.
I think he might be 265 now just because he's lost so much weight. But I think he said that when he was at his biggest, he was like 290. So yeah, he's a really big, big dude.
Good Lord. Well, on that note, that is all we have got for you tonight. We appreciate you joining us as always on Dodger Heads, presented by DodgerBlue.com. DodgerBlue.com. As you keep up with this throughout the week, feel free to check us out on social media, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, Facebook at DodgerBlue1958. DodgerBlue.com, of course, has got all the stories you need throughout the week. So we appreciate you listening. We appreciate you watching, and we'll see you next week.